Bonsuelo mathletes. Last time we looked at graph shifts. Today we're going to look at stretch compresses and reflections. By the way, the thing I'm going to start off with today is the same idea that we dealt with in just the shifts. And that is, are we changing the x or the y? And second, do you do the same as what the problem says or do you the opposite of what the problem says? I'm not changing that at all. Okay? I'm just applying it to the stretch compresses and reflections, whereas last time I just applied it to the shifts. Well, today what we're going to do is we're just going to look at how do you read the equation. Okay? And basically it comes down to this. Again, first, what are you going to do? You're going to look at whether you're going to change the x or the y. And you're going to do the exact same thing as we did last time. Can you put the number on the same side of the equation as the y or not? If you can, then it's changing the y, and if you can't, it's changing the x. Again, I don't try and put it with the x. The question is, can you put it with the y? Okay? I'm not actually going to move anything. I'm on the shifts, I sometimes moved it and sometimes didn't. I'm not going to move anything here because, especially with the stretch compresses, if you start moving the numbers around, they can get very, very confusing. So that's the same thing as before. Next thing is the same thing as before. Do you do the same or the opposite of what it appears to say? And that's determined this way. Once you know, and you have to know this first, what variable you're changing, then is the number you're looking at on the same side of the equation or the opposite side of the equation of that variable. If it's on the same side of the equation, you do the opposite of whatever it seems like the equation's saying. And if it's on the opposite side of the equation, then you do the same thing as what the equation is saying. Okay? Now, so that's not new, right? So then what's new? This is what's new right here. If a number is multiplied by a variable, then it is stretched, compressed, or reflected. Now, I wouldn't worry about knowing whether it's a stretch, whether it's a compress, whether it's a reflection. This is what I would say. You're just multiplying a number. Okay. Do you multiply by the number that's there, or do you multiply by the reciprocal of the number that's there? I never even used the word divide here. Okay. Now, last time, we did this. We did the shifts. So what we're looking at new today is this thing right here, and that is if a number's multiplied. Now, some people do the stretch compresses separate from the reflections. And I don't. I would just do the reflections and the stretch compresses all as one thing. So basically it leaves you to do two things. Multiply or add, subtract. Okay? Today what we're going to do is just read the equation, and then next time we'll take a look at some examples. Now, real quickly, what's the opposite of something? Well, the shifts, remember, are something that's added, subtracted. Okay? Well, what's the opposite of addition? You subtract. What's the opposite of subtraction? You add. Okay. But with multiplication, what's the multiplicative opposite? Okay? It doesn't change the sign whatsoever. You don't need to write this down. Just listen. Okay? And then kind of look at what I'm scribbling on the page. But you'll have a chance to write some of this down later. Okay, so if we're talking about a shift, let's say it says x plus 4. Well, what's the opposite? The opposite is a negative 4. Okay? Let's say it says x minus 7. Well, what's the opposite of that? A positive 7. You change the sign. When you're talking about addition or subtraction, you change the sign. But that's not what it is with multiplication. Okay, the multiplicative opposite of something is the reciprocal. So let's say you have this. Let's say you have 7x. And how we actually read the equation, we'll get to a little bit later. But let's say you want to multiply x by the reciprocal, by the opposite of 7. Well, you don't multiply by -7. You multiply x by 1/7. That's the multiplicative opposite of 7. Okay, let's say you have a 2/5 x, and you want to multiply by the opposite. What's the multiplicative opposite of 2/5? It's 5/2. And again, if this is not really making a lot of sense right now, that's okay. Eventually, I think once we look at problems, it'll make a little more sense. The thing I'm trying to get is the multiplicative opposite has nothing to do with the sign being positive or negative. Like, what if you had -7/9? What's the multiplicative opposite? It's 9/7. Sorry, that's wrong. It's -9/7. Why? Because I shouldn't have. I did, but I shouldn't have. You don't change the sign. Okay? So the thing I just want to get across is, what does the multiplicative opposite mean? It means you multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, you don't change the sign. All right. And again, if that doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense right now, that's probably okay. Just remember, the multiplicative opposite has nothing to do with the sign. Okay, so let's start taking a look at examples. And what we're going to do is, and I've already written it all out for you, is we're going to take a look at an equation, and we're going to see, what are we going to do to it? Okay, so your basic graph is y equals, or f of x equals square root of x. So what's in this new equation here that's not in the original? Well, there's this -2, there's this +7, and there's +8, okay? We're going to deal with the shifts last. So we're going to deal with the pluses and minuses last, the +7 and the +8 last. So that -2, that's multiplication. We're going to do that first. Again, what are the two questions you're going to ask now? Is it with the x or y? And then once you figure that out, do you do the same as what it says with the opposite? Okay, so could I move that -2 over with the f of x? Yes, I could. Okay, I'm not going to, and I would really recommend you not. I would recommend you read the equation as it's written. But, okay, so I could move it over so it's with the y. Now, is that -2 right now on the same side of the equation as the y variable, or is it on the opposite side? Well, it's on the opposite side, so I do the same as what it appears to say. What does it appear to say? Multiply by -2. So what do? I'm going to multiply y by -2. Okay? And again, how this is going to work on a graph we'll get to eventually. I just want to make sure we can read the equation. Okay, let's look at, and it doesn't matter whether you look at the 7 or the 8 next, because it doesn't matter whether you do the x, which one. Okay, so let's just take a look at the 7. Can I move the 7 to the other side of the equation? No, so it's with the x. Therefore, is it on the same side of the equation as the x? Yes, so I do the opposite of what it's, appears to say. So I'm going to shift it -7. In other words, I'm going to shift it horizontally left 7. Okay, let's take a look at the 8. Could I move the 8 over with the y? Yes, I could. Therefore, it's with the y. It's on the opposite side of the equation, so I do exactly what it appears to say. So I'm going to add 8 to y. So I'm going to shift it up 8. Okay, and as long as you do the multiplication, the -2 first, it doesn't matter after that. Myself, when it comes to the shifts, I do the shifts at the same time. I usually find it easier to do the horizontal one first, but that's just a judgment call. Okay, so again, if you're having any problem with these, make sure you talk to me, because if you don't get how to read the equation, you can't do it correctly. Okay, next one. Given the graph of y equals f of x, how would you graph, et cetera, et cetera? Okay, again, what's there that wasn't in the original? Well, you have the 3, you have the 5, and you have the -4. Again, let's take care of the multiplication first. Now, there's two types of multiplication here. There's the 3, and then there's the 5. Does it matter which one you do first? No, not really. I'm just going to do the 3 first just because it's written there first. But we have to do the -4 last because that's subtraction. Okay, so the 3, could I move it over with the y? Yes, I can, so it's with the y. But since it's on the opposite side of the equation, I do exactly what it says, so I'm going to multiply y by 3. Okay, now here's the hard part. The 5, could I move it over with the y? No, I can't because it's in the parentheses, so the 5 is with the x. 5 is changing the x. Now, is that 5 on the same side of the equation as the x? Yes, it is. Therefore, I do the opposite of what it says. And what it says right now is multiply by 5. So what do I do? Now, some people would say divide by 5, and that's fine, but usually it's actually kind of harder to do it that way. So I'm going to multiply by 1/5. Remember, 1/5 is the multiplicative opposite of 5. You don't change the sign. Okay, and quite frankly, that's where people are going to have the difficulty, is with the x's, okay, on multiplication. Okay, the -4, I can move it over, therefore it's with the y. Since it's on the opposite side of the equation as the y, I do exactly what it says, so I'm going to go down 4. Okay? All right, number 3, last one, just for reading the equation. There's the original equation, what's in the new one that wasn't there before, the 7 and the -4. Again, they're both being multiplied, so it doesn't matter which one you do first. I'll do the 7. Can I move the 7 over to the y? Yes, I can. Okay, is it on the same or the opposite side as the y? It's on the opposite side, so I do exactly what it says, so I multiply y by 7. Okay, how about the -4? I can't move it over to the side of the equation with the y, so it's with the x. And since it's being on the same side of the equation as the x, I multiply x by the multiplicative opposite of -4. What's the multiplicative opposite of -4? It's -1/4. You just take the reciprocal of it. You don't change its sign. All right. That's how to read an equation. Again, two things. The same two things as in the last video. Okay, we're just applying it to multiplication now. The two things are, is it with the x or the y? And how do you determine that? Can you stick it with the y or not? If you can stick it with the y, it's with the y. If you can't, then it's with the x. And then once you determine which variable the number is changing, is that number on the same side of the equation as that variable? If it is, you do the opposite of what it says. And if it's on the opposite side of the equation as that variable, you do exactly what it says. And the key here, I don't know, that's the key, the thing I just said, but the part you got to be careful is when you're multiplying a number by x, because the multiplicative opposite of something is the reciprocal. Okay? All right, I'm going to leave it there. You can listen to this video again. If you have a question, please ask me before you go on to the actual examples, because if you don't know how to read it, it's not going to do you any good. Bonsuelo, everybody.